When the HOA slapped a lien on my 150-year-old family home, I never imagined I'd end up in a desperate struggle against a corrupt president who'd been snatching properties across our neighborhood for years. I certainly didn't expect that opening my front door one afternoon would reveal the mayor himself, holding evidence that would change everything. It started with a crisp, official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Bills don't usually rattle me at my age, but this one felt different, ominous. My hands trembled as I ripped it open right there on the front lawn. Dear Mrs. Grayson, failure to comply with Willow Creek HOA regulations has resulted in a lien on your property. A lien? On my family's home? It felt like a punch to the gut. This house had stood for 150 years, built by my great-great-grandfather with his own hands. Now some neighborhood association thought they could take it? What's wrong, Laura? My neighbor Margaret called from across our shared fence, her worried face peeking through the rose bushes my grandmother planted decades ago. You look like you've seen a ghost. I waved the letter at her. The HOA put a lien on my house. They say my roses are non-compliant vegetation and my green shutters are unapproved exterior modifications. These shutters have been green since 1910. Margaret's eyes widened. She glanced around nervously before motioning me closer. I warned you about Linda Harris, she whispered. Ever since she became HOA president, she's been targeting the older homes. The Thompsons lost their place last month over a fence height that hadn't changed in 20 years. But why? I asked, crumpling the letter in my fist. My property taxes are paid. I keep everything tidy. It's your land, Laura, Margaret said. You've got 2 acres on a corner lot. Linda's husband owns Harris Construction. They want to build condos where your roses grow. I felt sick. They can't just take my home. They claim you owe $37,500 in violations and fees. Margaret pointed at the figure I'd been too stunned to notice. On my fixed income from my late husband Henry's pension? Impossible. Inside, I sank into my grandmother's rocking chair, surrounded by 4 generations of family photos. My daughter Emily smiled from the mantel, posing in front of this house on her wedding day. How could I tell her our legacy might be gone? The phone rang, snapping me out of my daze. Mom, want me for lunch? Emily's cheerful voice made my eyes well up. Actually, honey, could you come over instead? Something's happened. An hour later, Emily sat at our kitchen table, reading the HOA letter through her paralegal lens. This is outrageous, she fumed. They can't retroactively enforce rules on a house older than their association. Apparently, Henry signed something when Willow Creek expanded 5 years ago. I admitted he was so sick then. Maybe he didn't know what it meant. Emily's face hardened. Dad would never sign away your rights to this house. We need to figure out what's really going on. We spent the afternoon digging through dusty attic boxes, tax records, deeds, old photos, anything to build a case. As the sun dipped low, casting shadows across the hardwood floors my ancestors laid, Emily found something. Mom, look at this. She held up a folder labeled HOA Correspondence in Henry's neat handwriting. Inside was a letter from Linda's husband, Mark Harris, dated 3 months before Henry died. Mr. Grayson, as discussed, our company offers $450,000 for your property. Please reconsider before we pursue alternative measures. My blood ran cold. They've been after our home for years. Emily's phone buzzed. Her face paled. Mom, my friend at the county clerk's office says the HOA filed foreclosure papers this morning. They're not just threatening, they're moving. The Willow Creek HOA office looked more like a luxury spa than a neighborhood hub. Glass walls, sleek furniture, spotless. Linda Harris sat behind her desk like royalty, barely glancing up as I walked in. Mrs. Grayson, what a surprise, she said, her voice syrupy with fake warmth. Here to settle your account? I set my folder of documents on her pristine desk. I'm here to understand why you think you can put a lien on a house my family's owned since before the Civil War. Linda's smile didn't reach her eyes. History's charming, but rules are rules. Your husband signed binding agreements when our community expanded. Show me. I demanded, my heart racing but my voice steady. She slid a document over. There was Henry's signature, scrawled at the bottom of fine print, dated during his worst chemo days when he could barely think straight. He was dying of cancer when he signed this. I said, quietly. He wasn't in his right mind. That's not my concern, Linda replied, inspecting her manicured nails. You owe $37,500. Pay by month's end or foreclosure proceeds. I flipped through the violations. $750 for unauthorized plants, my heritage roses. $5,000 for unapproved paint color. The green shutters from World War I. Mrs. Grayson, Linda leaned forward. I'll be blunt. Your property doesn't fit Willow Creek's modern aesthetic. My husband's company would offer $400,000 to spare you the embarrassment of foreclosure. $400,000? My land was worth at least $800,000. Not with these violations, she smirked. Think about it, cash now or nothing. As I gathered my papers, handshaking, she added, the board votes on foreclosure this Friday. Tick-tock. Outside, I leaned against my car, struggling to breathe. A familiar voice broke through. Laura, you okay? It was Tom Bennett, from 3 houses down, the same Tom whose family lost their home last month. Tom, what happened to your place? I asked. Margaret said it was HOA violations. He glanced nervously at the office. Keep it down. Meet me at Riverside Park in an hour. An hour later, Tom sat at a picnic table, shredding a napkin. Mark Harris threatened my job, he whispered. Said he had friends on the hospital board who'd make trouble if I fought the violations. We couldn't risk it with Lisa's medical bills. My stomach churned. They're forcing people out? 7 homes in 3 years, he said. All taken by HOA liens, all bought at auction by Harris Construction. Old homes on big lots, like yours. At 7 a.m., I called Emily. Mom, is everything okay? Her voice was groggy. I need your help, I said, explaining Tom's story. This is serious, she replied, fully awake. It sounds like a RICO case, racketeering. Linda's using the HOA to steal properties cheap. What do? Document everything. We need the district attorney. Can you come to my office today? I'll get an attorney to join us. Hope flickered in me. But then my phone beeped with a text from Tom. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. 7 p.m. vote to foreclose your property. Linda pushed it through this morning. Come prepared. They're moving fast. I told Emily. That's illegal, she said firmly. They need proper notice. This proves they're breaking their own rules. I spent the morning at City Hall, requesting every document on my property. The clerk, a kind woman named Clara, raised her eyebrows at my pile. Someone's doing their homework. My home depends on it, I said. Wait here. She returned with a dusty map tube. This might help. Original survey from 1871. The yellowed map showed my property extended 20 feet beyond the current fence. Part of the community pool parking lot sat on my land. This changes everything. I whispered. The HOA built on my property without permission. Clara nodded. Developers get sloppy or hope no one checks the old records. I photographed everything, thanked her, and headed to Emily's office, updating Margaret and Paul, a retired lawyer neighbor, on the way. We'd meet an hour before the HOA meeting to plan. Back home, I organized my evidence, practicing my speech despite trembling hands. At 3 p.m., the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a suit I didn't recognize. Cautiously, I opened the door. Mrs. Grayson, I'm Mayor Phillips, he said, showing his ID. May I come in? We need to talk about Willow Creek HOA. I hesitated. Linda and the mayor were golf buddies. Was this a trick? I understand your caution, he said, reading my expression. But I'm here because disturbing documents about predatory practices in your neighborhood crossed my desk this morning. I let him in, leaving the door ajar. Are you aware someone's been using HOA authority to acquire properties here? He asked, setting his briefcase on my coffee table. I've been gathering evidence myself, I said warily. So has my office. He pulled out a flash drive. An anonymous whistleblower sent us this, including a recording of Linda Harris discussing plans to take your property with fake violations. My jaw dropped. A recording? Yes. She outlined her development scheme in private meetings. Your land central to her luxury condo project. He handed me the drive. This'll help at tonight's meeting. As he stood to leave, he paused. Did you know your home's up for the National Register of Historic Places? My office submitted it last month after the Historical Society flagged it as a rare original homestead. I had no idea. I breathed. Registered properties get exemptions from some HOA rules, he smiled. Worth mentioning tonight. After he left, I plugged in the drive. Linda's voice filled the room. The old Grayson place has 2 acres at the neighborhood entrance, prime for condos. Once the lien's in place, she'll never pay the fees. We'll grab it cheap at auction. A man's voice, Tom's, asked, what if she fights? Linda laughed. She's a widow in her 60s. What's she going to do? Besides, I control the board, 5 of 7 votes. Tears streamed down my face. Not from fear, but relief. This was our weapon. My hands shook as I parked outside the community center. Neighbors streamed in for the emergency HOA meeting. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about stopping a tyrant. Laura, wait up. Margaret hurried over. Ready? I clutched my evidence. As I'll ever be. Inside, the room buzzed with whispers. Linda stood at the podium, tapping her pen like a gavel. Spotting me, her eyes narrowed. Let's begin, she snapped. First item, vote to foreclose on 1872, Oak Lane, the Grayson property. My heart pounded. Due to violations and unpaid fines of $37,500. Linda smiled smugly. I move we proceed with foreclosure. Investors are ready to redevelop it into something valuable for our community. George, a neighbor, stood. Don't we hear from Laura first? Linda sighed. This isn't a courtroom, George. That's when I found my voice. Actually, I have evidence these violations are part of a fraud scheme. The room erupted in murmurs. Linda's face turned crimson. Sit down, Mrs. Grayson. This is inappropriate. Paul stood beside me. Point of order. HOA bylaws give homeowners a right to speak before foreclosure vote. Linda gripped the podium, knuckles white. Fine. 5 minutes. I connected my laptop to the projector, hands trembling. The screen lit up with a timeline. In 3 years, 7 Willow Creek homes were foreclosed by the HOA, all bought by Harris Construction, owned by Linda Harris. Gasps filled the room. Linda lunged toward me. You can't accuse without proof. I have proof. I showed property records. Linda bought these homes for pennies after HOA foreclosures. Then I played Henry's journal recording. Linda visited today. Said if I didn't sell, she'd make it impossible for Laura to keep the house after I'm gone. People gasped. Linda stormed at the projector. Turn that off. This meeting's over. But Mayor Phillips stepped in with 2 officers. Continue, Mrs. Grayson. I played the whistleblower's tape. Linda's voice rang out. The Grayson place is prime for condos. We'll take it cheap. Next, the Miller and Johnson properties. I pointed to old Mr. Johnson in his wheelchair. His violation started the day he refused to sell. Linda lunged for my laptop, screaming, "This is illegal." A deep voice cut through. Detective Carter. Florida's a one-party consent state, and we have a warrant for your financial records, Mrs. Harris. Chaos erupted. Linda shrieked. She was framed as Detective Carter read her rights. The lien on Mrs. Grayson's property is suspended pending investigation, Mayor Phillips announced, and I suggest new leadership for this HOA. As Linda was let out, neighbors hugged me, apologized, shared their own stories of her bullying. But Tom was missing. Outside, I saw him watching from his car. Our eyes met before he drove off. 6 months later, spring flowers bloomed around the new historic plaque on my lawn. Grayson Homestead, EST 1872, National Register of Historic Places. My roses, now protected by rewritten HOA bylaws, thrived. Margaret waved from across the street, planting trees for our beautification project. Hard to believe it's been half a year, she called. Indeed, Linda's arrest sparked an investigation revealing shell companies, forged documents, and bribes. 12 properties were illegally seized. 3 HOA board members faced charges. The papers called it the county's biggest property fraud case. Linda, free on bail, fought with high-priced lawyers, sending me threatening letters I forwarded to Detective Carter. My phone rang. "Mom, Linda took a plea deal," Emily said from the courthouse. 5 years probation, full restitution to victims, banned from real estate or HOAs for life. I sank onto my porch swing, relieved. It's over. Almost. Judge Wilson ordered her to apologize to each homeowner. She'll be at your house tomorrow, 2 p.m. that night. I barely slept, haunted by Linda's hateful glare from the meeting. Morning brought neighbors with casseroles and support, but I needed to face her alone. At 2 p.m., a black sedan pulled up. Linda stepped out, thinner, older, her designer clothes swapped for a plain gray suit. "Mrs. Grayson," she said stiffly, "I'm here per court order." I invited her in. She hesitated, uneasy in the home she'd tried to steal. We sat in silence in my living room, steeped in 5 generations of memories. "I'm required to apologize for my actions regarding your property," she recited. "My behavior was inappropriate and illegal." I studied her remorseless face. "That's it? After trying to take my family's legacy?" Her eyes flashed. "I built this neighborhood. These old houses dragged down property values. I was improving things. By threatening a dying man?" My voice stayed calm despite my racing heart. She looked away. "The courts ruled. I've lost everything. My company, my reputation. You still have a future. Henry lost his." For a moment, her mask slipped, revealing a flicker of fear. As she stood to leave, a car door slammed. Tom walked up, nervous. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said to Linda. "Court-ordered apology," she muttered, brushing past. Tom turned to me. "I'm here to make amends, Laura. Not court-ordered, just right." He handed me a leather portfolio. "These are the original deeds and maps Linda took from county records. No one can challenge your ownership now." My hands shook as I saw my great-grandfather's handwriting. "Why'd you help her, Tom?" He sat on the porch step. "She found my gambling debts. Threatened to tell Lisa. It started small, then I was in too deep. What now?" "Moving to Florida, near my daughter. Selling the house." He looked at mine. "I envy what you have. History, belonging." As Tom left, neighbors gathered for our first potluck. Margaret's idea to heal after Linda's reign. Tables groaned with food. Kids played where generations of Graysons had. Paul strummed his guitar. George wheeled Mr. Johnson under my century-old oak. Margaret handed me lemonade. The mayor called. The city council passed the Willow Creek Historic Protection Ordinance. No HOA can override it. As sunset bathed my house in gold, I realized its worth wasn't in dollars. The creaky floors, sticky windows, and cranky plumbing held stories money couldn't buy. Linda was gone, her schemes undone. With Emily, Margaret, and a reborn community beside me, I knew Henry would be proud. Our home and our neighborhood stood stronger than ever.